What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Today is going to be a pretty interesting video summarizing the year 2024. So I reviewed quite a few cars this year, so in today's video we're going to discuss the best, the worst, the most luxurious, the most disappointing, the quirkiest and weirdest vehicles I reviewed on the channel this year. So without further ado, let's get started. So I figured it'd be a fun topic to finish off the year. First off, I wish you all a Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Kwanzaa, and a Happy New Year. 2025 should be an exciting year, and I hope to continue bringing some cool cars onto the channel. But today's topic, we're going to be talking about 2024 and all the vehicles I reviewed. And this year I reviewed some of the most interesting and weirdest cars, and that's what we're going to be talking about. Now, to kick things off, let's start in no particular order with the biggest letdown. So the vehicle that really disappointed me the most, the one that I had pretty high expectations for, but then when I went and reviewed it and filmed it, I kind of walked away pretty disappointed. And I'm sure most of you can guess what this is if you guys follow along with the channel. That has to go with the Chevy Silverado EV. Yes, no surprise, I am not a fan of the Chevy Silverado EV, at least the one that I reviewed, which was the 4WT trim level. And I'll tell you why. I actually made a standalone video about this topic, but just to summarize, I thought that for the price, which the one I reviewed was around $80,000, it really was the most bare bones pickup truck you could buy. I mean, it is a work truck. It was the 4WT, which stands for work truck, but it was not worth the $80,000 price. And, I got a lot of pushback from people on my comments saying that, oh, it's definitely worth it because the range is 400 miles and, yada, yada, yada. And I agree with you. The range and the charging is pretty good. For the price point, it's great. The problem is the interior and just the feature set on that truck was not worth $80,000. And the market agrees with me because I was seeing work trucks going out there for the high 50s, low $60,000 range, which is really what they should have been priced at from the very beginning. Now, they initially said it was going to be $40,000, and that was just a pipe dream. But 50 to 60 is realistically what they should have been charging for them, given the feature set, the fact that you didn't even have like heated seats or any leather steering wheel. I mean, everything was plastic, black plastic, cheap. It just didn't feel premium at all. And like I said, that's what the going price is nowadays because the $80,000 price was just unrealistic. Chevy needed to lower that price in order to move the inventory. Now, I had no complaints against the Chevy RST, the $100,000 electric vehicle, the GMC Sierra EV, which is based on the same platform. I have no issues with those. Yes, they're extremely expensive at $100,000, but they come with the top-of-the-line features that you would expect from a $100,000 pickup truck. Not what the $80,000 pickup truck was providing. I mean, it didn't even have a power front trunk. I mean, it was just so bare bones. There was no cool features there. It just really was a disappointment. And the other reason I just feel like it missed the mark is they had so many years to beat out the competition. I mean, the F-150 Lightning has been out for a couple years. Same with the Rivian R1T, which maybe isn't a direct competitor, but it still is an electric pickup truck. Even the Cybertruck has been out, and the Silverado EV is just coming out as of this summer. They just had so much competition that they had to come out with something that was above and beyond. And aside from the range, which is around 400 miles on the 3WT, you really don't have anything else. And with the range, it's not because they're like super aerodynamic or the engineering is so amazing that they're able to become a very efficient vehicle. It's really because they packed in almost twice the size of the battery in my Rivian inside the Silverado. That's how they're able to get the 400-mile range. I mean, it's not really that impressive because the battery is massive, and that's exactly why the price was like $80,000. It's because they just needed to recoup the cost of that massive battery. So that is a vehicle that I wish was a little bit better. And I think they're finally coming out with similarly priced trim levels that are more equipped to the $80,000 work truck that I reviewed over the summer. Now, the next vehicle on my list is the most luxurious car that I reviewed all year, arguably the most luxurious car I reviewed of all time. And that title has to go to the Mercedes S580. That car was absolutely phenomenal on the inside. I've been, to this day, telling my friends and family about it. It was truly an incredible vehicle, and I fell in love with the Mercedes S-Class, and I would recommend it to anybody who's really looking for the ultimate luxury cruiser. Now, from the exterior, I don't think it's all that great. I mean, I think it's not bad looking. I don't think it's great looking either. I think it's kind of just flies under the radar. And to me, I think it looks a little bit too similar to the C-Class because Mercedes has been doing that for like the better part of the decade. It's kind of that Russian nesting doll where, you know, the C-Class looks like a mini E-Class, which looks like a mini S-Class. And I don't necessarily agree with it. I think BMW takes a little bit of a better approach where the 7 Series and the 5 Series and the 3 Series all look a little bit different, but they still share a certain design language. So I prefer BMW's design language for the 7 Series than the S-Class, but on the interior, the S-Class was just unmatched. One I had the red interior with the wood that's pinstriped and the aluminum bezels, and then the second row had that luxury recliner chair with the massaging seats. I mean, it was just perfection. I mean, this is what I would expect from like a Rolls-Royce or a Bentley, and Mercedes accomplished it. But at that price point, it better accomplish that, because the one I had was around $160,000 or so. One of the most expensive vehicles I've reviewed. And obviously, at that price point, you better have a beautiful interior, but it did not disappoint. It was worth the $160,000 on the interior. It also drove super smooth, one of the softest driving vehicles I've ever driven in. The suspension was amazing. The sound quality with the Burmester audio, I mean, it's just hands down, wonderful vehicle, but also a very hefty price tag. So Mercedes S580, most luxurious car I reviewed all year. All right, the next category is the most boring vehicle I reviewed all year. And it's not a bad vehicle overall. It's just, there was nothing exciting about it. And that title goes to the Nissan Altima SR. Now, I reviewed an SR VC Turbo a few years back, and I actually didn't mind it. It was the exact same trim level. It was the SR, except the powertrain was a little bit different. It had a 2-liter turbocharged variable compression 4-cylinder, and in the Altima, which is a generally lightweight vehicle compared to some of the crossovers and stuff driving around, it was a pretty peppy powertrain. I actually really liked it. I thought it was just as good as like a V6 Camry, but it's probably a little bit torquier, so it was a great option. Unfortunately, as of 2025, they got rid of that engine option, and so the SR that I reviewed had a 2.5-liter 4-cylinder that was just as regular and bland as any other 2.5-liter 4-cylinder. There was no turbocharging, there was no, fancy electrification or hybridization that would maybe propel it to 60 a little bit quicker. They just kind of kept the standard, the same old same. And there wasn't really anything interesting in regards to the powertrain. And then the exterior, although it looks pretty decent, I think it's a good looking car. The Altima is fine, especially with the bronze wheels on the vehicle that I had. It really is kind of long in the tooth at this point. I mean, there's not really any big updates over the last few years, especially when you start looking at the competition like the Honda Accord, the Toyota Camry, and the Hyundai Sonata. Those have all been recently updated. They look a little bit more, into the future, a little bit more advanced. And the Altima's kind of just sitting in the background. There really wasn't anything new about it on the exterior. And then when you jump on the inside, although the build quality is fine and the nice materials on the inside, there was like everything was leather wrapped and it was good, it just didn't really have anything that really popped. I mean, there was no all-digital gauge cluster. The screen was pretty small. It was like 8 inches. And yes, you can get the upgraded 12-inch, but you have to step up all the way to the most expensive model. And there was just nothing there in terms of technology that really wowed me at the price point. And speaking of the price point, I don't really see why you would spend, the one I had was $32,000 on the Altima when you could go in Nissan's lineup and get the Rogue for just a couple $1,000s more, or get the Kicks or the Sentra for a few $1,000s less. I mean, it didn't seem like there was really any compelling reason to go for the Altima over any vehicles inside of Nissan's own lineup or any of the competition. I mean, a lot of the other competition offer hybrid options, some sort of electrification, really high MPG, and a very similar price point to the Altima. So it just seems to me like the Altima's kind of been forgotten about. And I have heard that they're probably going to be canceling off the Altima here in the 2025 or 2026 model year. There's not going to be a next generation model, to my understanding. And you can kind of see that just based on the feature set that the Altima comes with and the price point. I mean, it's forgivable if the price point was like $5,000 less than the competition, but it's not. You can go and get any of the competitors for, $1,000 or $2,000 within the same price point of the one I reviewed. So that was a vehicle that I feel like Nissan should invest a little bit more time in if they really want to be in that space, because I don't really see a compelling reason to go for it. All right, now for the next category, let's talk about the most underrated vehicle that I reviewed this year. And that title has to go to something in Nissan's lineup, and that is the Nissan Ariya. It's the all-electric crossover that they released just a couple years ago, and I gotta say, I was really impressed with it. Now, it's not best in class in really any category. In terms of battery size, it's 87 kilowatt hours. In terms of peak charging, it's actually pretty low at 130 kilowatts when a lot of Tesla products are over 200. Its range is anywhere from 200 to 300 miles. Its at-home charging is like 7.2 kilowatts. So when you look at the specs on paper itself, there's really nothing impressive about it. And that's why I think a lot of people kind of roast it in videos and comments and reviews, is there's just nothing class leading about it, especially given the fact that Nissan had a leg up amongst the competition because the Leaf came out like back in the late 2000s. And so they had a long time to develop a very advanced electric vehicle, and they really didn't. However, there is another side of just looking at the stats and the numbers on paper, and that is how you feel driving it. And I gotta say, I was very impressed with the Ariya. From the exterior styling, I think they nailed it. I think it looks really nice. It's very swoopy, very futuristic. I think it's the best looking Nissan that they sell. I love the front lighting signature, especially at night. Like, it lights up everything around the vehicle. It's very, very premium looking, luxurious. The rear end taillights look really nice. And then on the interior, it's very spacious. They have tons of legroom in the back, large cargo volume. I mean, it's like the size of a Nissan Rogue, but the interior is probably the size of like a Murano or bigger. And the use of materials was really, really nice. I mean, they had this blue suede on the platinum trim level I was reviewing. And if you guys don't like the blue coloration, you can choose obviously different trim levels with different colors on the inside. But I love the blue suede. It's something I haven't seen very often. You had blue leather seats and just the interior design with the ambient lighting coming through this cool plastic kind of structure on the door panels and on the center console. It just felt very different than any other Nissan and really any other electric vehicle I've driven in terms of styling. It felt unique, and you don't see very many of them on the road either. So when you drive one or you see one driving around, it kind of feels like you're driving something a little bit more special than a Tesla Model Y where you see on every single corner. Coming back to the interior, I do love the interior wood paneling and the fact that you had these haptic controls to, regulate the controls on the screen. And then you could have this James Bond-like hidden compartment come out of the vehicle, and then you can move the center console. There was just some unique touches and engineering that made it feel, different than just your pedestrian vehicle. And also, the way it rode was great. It was plenty quick, 0 to 60 in like 4.5 seconds, but it felt even quicker than that. I felt like the range was decent. I think mine had about 260, 270 miles. Never felt concerned with range, especially if you just charge it at home. And then just driving on the freeway, it felt like it was very smooth. It soaked up bumps really well. Felt very, very premium and luxurious. You could easily slap an Infinity logo on it, and I don't think anybody would be, questioning that. And also, in terms of safety features, it had Nissan's ProPilot Assist 2.1, which allows hands-free driving on the freeway. So there were some glitches to it, and it wasn't a perfect system, but on certain interstates that I was on, it allowed me to take my hands off the steering wheel, and the vehicle would steer itself and brake and accelerate, and it was really cool. I haven't experienced Chevy Super Cruise or Ford Blue Cruise. I hear those a little bit better. But when you compare it to some of the other competition, like from Toyota and Honda, that don't even offer any hands-free driving, I think it's phenomenal. And so I commend Nissan for creating a really good electric vehicle, even though on paper, it's really not that impressive. And that's why I think it's an underrated EV. All right, for the next category, it's going to be a little bit of a longer section because we're going to be talking about the weirdest or quirkiest car I reviewed all year long. And I would say this is actually the weirdest car I reviewed of all time. And that has to go to the Tesla Cybertruck. Now, as a little side panel here, I actually don't have anything against or for the Cybertruck. I'm unlike a lot of people that are either super gung-ho about it and it's the best truck ever, or those that are super anti-Cybertruck that think it's the worst thing on the planet. I'm kind of right in the middle. I think there's pros to it, that being the fact that, well, first off, I think, for the longest time, we've been under the understanding that cars have to be a certain shape because of efficiency or safety or whatever, right? And the Cybertruck proves that that's not necessarily true. You could have this weird looking shape and it passes all of the, efficiencies, actually a pretty efficient aerodynamic vehicle, and all the safety tests. I mean, like, it's fine. It passes all those tests, even though it looks like a triangle. And so I commend it for that. And then the other pro, in my opinion, is the fact that it's made of stainless steel. Now, the fact that it rusts is a totally different topic, but I'm more talking about the fact that you can take this truck off-roading and get some, branches hitting it or pinstriping or, maybe nick a rock or something like that. And in a $100,000 pickup truck like even the Rivian, I'm going to feel bad about it because my paint's going to be scratched up or chipped or whatever. And in a Cybertruck, I wouldn't really have to worry about that. Door dings, stuff like that happens just in day-to-day driving. You don't have to worry about that in a truck that you spent $100,000 on, which I think is a great pro. Yeah, there are downsides to it, given the rusting, and then if people wrap the vehicle, then you pretty much have the same problem as a paint job. But nonetheless, I like those pros. The cons, I mean, the list kind of goes on. I'm sure you've seen them in the comments. For me, I don't really particularly like the way it looks. I think it's an ugly-looking vehicle, but that's personal opinion. A lot of people don't like the look of the Rivian. I totally understand that too. So that's just my personal opinion. And I also just don't think it really, similar to the Silverado EV, really accomplished anything above and beyond. There was no engineering marvel to the Cybertruck when it came out. Now, when it was announced, there was definitely some, class-leading type of technology that they had promised in the vehicle. But by the time it came out, 5 years later, there was already vehicles out there with the technology that they promised in the Cybertruck. So that was kind of my big complaint about it, is they just didn't really accomplish anything that was, incredible or best in class or, first ever type of stuff that you kind of expected from the Cybertruck. But anyways, I want to talk about my experience reviewing this vehicle because it is a very odd car to drive. So I reviewed the Cybertruck in March of this year, and it was one of the very earliest Cybertrucks that have been on the roads here in Utah. It was actually a shout out to my buddy Alex at EV Auto. He owns a dealership. They have 2 locations, and they sell only electric vehicles or hybrid vehicles. And he was one of the first in the state to get a Cybertruck. And he said, "You're welcome to film it." So I definitely raised my hand and said I would love to. And when I showed up at the dealership, it was the first time I really seen a Cybertruck. I think I'd seen one driving by on the road, but to actually sit there and look at it, my first ever experience. And it's a weird looking vehicle. I mean, I'm sure you've seen a dozen of them on the road, but what was weirder was driving it. So he told me that the car's been dirty. It was the middle of winter in March, so it's a lot of snow. And he's like, "Hey, do you mind washing it before the video? I just want it to look pretty good." And I do that quite a few times before I review vehicles. I always wash them. And I said, "Yeah, for sure, I'll wash it." And he's like, "Oh, there's a car wash just, a couple blocks down." So he gave me the keys or the key card. And sitting in the vehicle for the first time, it is a weird shape. If you've ever sat in a Cybertruck, you know exactly what I'm talking about because, the windshield pretty much stretches the length of a football field. I mean, I could not reach it. Like in most cars, you can reach over and touch the end of the windshield. You cannot do that in a Cybertruck without laying down onto the dashboard itself to reach that tip. So it's a very weird experience from that standpoint. You've got these giant A-pillars and you're looking out into the windows on the front A-pillar section, and it's just a very weird shape. But what's weirder is driving it. So first off, I put it into drive, which very similar to other Tesla products, it's typically a swipe motion. So unlike a lot of cars where you have the gear selector stock or some sort of gear lever, in Tesla products as of recent, you actually have to swipe it on the screen. So in order to go into drive, you swipe it forward or up to go to drive, and reverse is backwards, and there's a button for the park. Now there is a redundant set of controls up above you near the rear view mirror, but those are really more so for emergencies. You're really just going to be using the touchscreen to select your gear. Now, the reason I mention this is because I am used to, in my Rivian and in Mercedes products, and a lot of vehicles that have the stock to regulate whether you're going in reverse or drive, typically, you actually swipe up for whatever reason to go into reverse. So that's how it is in my Rivian and a lot of Chevy products. Swiping up reverse, swiping down is drive. Well, that is kind of counterintuitive when you think about it. But when you're used to it, you kind of start doing that motion even when you don't have a gear selector stock. So what happened was I actually wanted to go in reverse, but I swiped on the screen upwards, which means I put it into drive. And as I was looking to reverse, I started putting on the accelerator and I started moving forward, and I was probably inches away from running into a Tesla Model 3 in front of me. I mean, this may have been the very first crash of a Cybertruck if I happened to hit that Tesla in front of me, but thankfully I caught myself super quick and quickly, hit the brakes and put it into reverse, pushing it backwards. But that was the first kind of weird thing, but that's more so just getting used to it. That if you've driven a Tesla before, you're going to be fine. You're not going to be an idiot like me. The second thing that was weird was the rear wheel steering. And I'm used to rear wheel steering. However, because the Cybertruck has a steer-by-wire system, which means there's not a physical connection between the steering wheel and the wheels themselves. Infiniti was actually the very first to introduce this, but they also had a fail-safe connection, whereas the Cybertruck is the very first vehicle to have no connection whatsoever. But because of that, the ratio to turn the wheel isn't like, 2.5 turns to put it into full lock. You really just have to turn it like 3/4 of the way, and then you're almost in a full lock scenario, because the ratio will change or adjust depending on your speed. So if you're going at highway speeds, if you turn it 3/4 of the way, you're not going to be all of a sudden doing a U-turn. But in a parking lot, it's a very sensitive system. That, mixed with the rear wheel steering, makes it very hard to really understand how to turn this vehicle, because you're going to obviously overcorrect. And that's exactly what happened. So I put it in reverse, and I put it back into drive to kind of turn the wheel to go straight. I was finding myself just overcorrecting and really turning further than I wanted to, because I just wasn't used to the combination of steer-by-wire with rear wheel steering. So that was a very odd experience. Then finally hitting the road, not only are the proportions of the vehicle very hard to figure out, especially because that windshield is so far down, you've never experienced anything like it, unless maybe you're like a school bus driver or something like that, where you have a giant windshield. It's a very different experience. And also, the end of the windshield isn't the end of the car. There's still a frunk, right? So it goes a little bit further. So it's very hard to figure out the edges of the vehicle. On top of that, you have very small side view mirrors. And the blind spots are very large, because if you have the tonneau cover closed, which most of the time I feel like Cybertruck owners do, you can't really see out the rear end. Even if you can, the shape of the vehicle makes it so that your blind spots are massive. So you have to rely on the cameras and the blind spot monitoring to really figure out what's going on around you. So that takes some getting used to. Also, with the tonneau cover closed, obviously you can't use the rear view mirror up above you. Now, a lot of vehicles like GM products, Cadillacs and whatnot, they have a digital rear view camera mirror. So you flip a switch and you have a camera showing you what's going on behind you. Well, the Cybertruck doesn't have that, even though I think that would be logical. Instead, when the tonneau cover is closed and you can't look out the rear view mirror, you have to look back at the screen, and then it's going to show you what's going on behind you. All of those things combined make for a very interesting driving experience, because not only are you getting used to the fact that instead of looking up above you to see what's going on behind you, you have to look down at the screen. Not only can you not look at your blind spots, but you also have very small side view mirrors. Not only can you not figure out the length of the windshield and the proportions of the car, but your steering is very sensitive, so when you do make a change in the lane, you gotta be very careful to not overcorrect. So all of that is to say, it is a very strange driving experience. I've driven lots of electric vehicles that are already a little bit different than conventional gas-powered vehicles in general, because of regen braking and just the power delivery, etc. I've driven sports cars and supercars like Lamborghinis, which obviously take also a learning curve to figure out the power and whatnot. And by far, the Cybertruck took me the longest amount of time to figure out. It was the biggest learning curve, because there's just so much of a different experience driving that than any other vehicle. And I'm sure Tesla lovers in the comments will go, I figured it out in like 10 seconds. I knew exactly how to drive. And that's great. That's fantastic. Good for you. But to the average person who's scared to drive an electric vehicle because of the power, because of the regen braking, it's going to take some time to figure out the Cybertruck. Now again, as all things, if you drive it for a week or whatever, if you own the vehicle, you can easily figure it out. But it is a totally different driving experience than any other vehicle I've driven, and it was the weirdest and quirkiest car I reviewed ever. Now, the second to last category, and probably the main category or main topic of today's video, is the best car I reviewed all year long. It's the one I would recommend to really anybody. It was just the biggest surprise. It was the one that really, I felt, the company or the manufacturer knocked it out of the ballpark, and that actually goes back to Nissan. So not only was Nissan the most boring car, or the kind of the worst car, it was the most underrated, but now they also have the best car I reviewed all year long, and that title has to go to the 2025 Nissan Kicks. Yes, the Nissan Kicks, I think, was the most improved, most impressive. Honestly, I think it's a phenomenal vehicle based on the price point. I mean, it just does everything so well. Now, the second runner-up to this category would have been the Buick Envista, and up to, I don't know, September or October, before I reviewed the Nissan Kicks, that vehicle held that title. But once I reviewed the Kicks, I was blown away. The Envista is a little bit better in terms of quietness and ride quality and just general driving around town. But in terms of features and amenities and interior quality, the Nissan Kicks is fantastic. The one I reviewed was the SR trim level, the top of the line, with all-wheel drive. That is a huge thing here because the Envista does not come with all-wheel drive. With all-wheel drive, it was $32,000, which is around the same price of the Altima I reviewed, except the SR came with dual 12.3-inch touchscreens, Google-based software. You had wireless Apple CarPlay, wireless Android Auto, heated seats. You had speakers inside of the headrest, a wireless charging pad. You had all of the safety features like adaptive cruise control, blind spot monitoring, lane keep assist, yada, yada, yada. I mean, the list just goes on of how much value is in the Nissan Kicks. And then in terms of powertrain, you get a standard 2-liter 4-cylinder engine. There's no turbocharging, which a lot of people worry about the longevity of, and nothing like that. It's just a standard 2-liter 4-cylinder engine. The only downside is really the Xtronic CVT. It is a continuously variable transmission, unlike the Envista, which although it has a turbocharged engine, it has a conventional automatic transmission, a torque converter automatic. So that is really the only disadvantage that I see for the Nissan Kicks, but everything else from the exterior design, which is spunky, it's modern, it's kind of boxy and a little bit more rugged. It's what I hear is based off of a shoe, like a sneaker, the Kicks. I don't really see it, but I think it's a very good looking vehicle. It just has so much personality, and at the end of the day, it's such an affordable car. When the average price of a new vehicle is like $48,000, they just really knocked it out of the ballpark. It just does everything so well. Plenty of space on the inside, even though it's a subcompact crossover. You sit in the second row, you could easily have 2 adults sitting back there. You have nearly 30 cubic feet of space in the back or in the trunk, which is nearly the same as any compact crossover. I mean, it just does everything well, and you get all-wheel drive. So if you live in a climate like I do here in Utah where it snows a lot, you got that all-wheel drive security. You really can't go wrong with the Kicks, and you can pretty easily get them in the $30,000 or less range if you choose the lower trim levels with slightly fewer features. But they still have like tons of technology, and if you just need an affordable new car because you want the latest and greatest safety features and tech, Nissan Kicks is the way to go. I mean, it hands down just beats out the competition, and that is why I think it's the best car of the year. Now for the last category, it's really not a video or anything like that. It really just has to go to my favorite video of the year, or I should say my favorite experience of the year. And that has to be with me traveling out to Denver to pick up the Rivian and driving it back the same day. I don't know if I really shared the experience. I kind of mentioned it briefly in my delivery day video, but what happened was this was kind of in a way, a last-minute thing. I mean, I've been wanting the Rivian for quite a while. I've been monitoring their website for a long time. Finally, leasing opened up here in Utah, and I through happenstance, happened to stumble upon this particular quad motor, which was the last one, to my understanding, in the United States in the Gen 1 version, and it happened to be in Colorado, and unfortunately, I wasn't able to ship it. Even though I pleaded with Rivian to figure out a way to ship it, I'd even pay extra for it. It was not happening, and so I had to make a trip out to Colorado, which was not ideal, but at the same time, I decided to make it a little bit of a fun adventure, so I told my dad to travel out there with me if he wanted to, and he was totally down. But I actually didn't tell him why we were traveling to Denver. I just said, so-and-so date, we're going to be flying out early in the morning, and then we're going to be driving back home. So obviously he had an idea that it was car related, because how would you drive back home without a car of some sort, either a rental car or buying a new car? In this case, I think he had guessed based on knowing me that this was going to be purchasing a new car, but he had no idea what car this was, any details, nothing like that. And what's funny is, I've told the story to my family and friends, when we were taking the Uber to get to the airport here in Utah, a Mustang Mach-E was actually our Uber driver. And for whatever reason, similar to all Ubers out there, the air conditioning was not really turned on. There wasn't really any ventilation in the car. I think they were trying to conserve it, or for whatever reason, in the second row it was very, very hot. And even though we told the Uber driver to turn on the AC, it didn't help. And so we get to the airport, and this was kind of in the middle of summer, so it's very hot, even though it is early in the morning. We get to the airport, my dad, he's kind of so frustrated at the car, he's like, just whatever you buy, do not buy an electric vehicle, because clearly they can't, even support good air conditioning. And what's funny is I was going out to buy an electric vehicle, so that kind of added to the funniness of the story. But then when he sat in this car, he absolutely loved it. He thinks the air conditioning was fantastic. He realized that Uber driver just wasn't turning on the AC for whatever reason. But that experience was cool, because really the only time my dad figured out what vehicle we were buying was because we walked kind of around the corner of the service center, and you can see the big Rivian lettering on the side of the building, and he's like, oh wow, you're buying a Rivian, and that was just a really cool experience. I got to share that with him, and then we drove back that exact same day. It took about 10 hours, 10 and a half hours to get back home, but it was just a fun experience. We went out to eat, and we just kind of shared this journey together, and that was a really, really fun moment, and my favorite video, hands down, or my favorite car experience, I should say, hands down, of the year. But that finishes off today's recap video of the year. It's a little bit longer than I expected, but I thought I'd share my thoughts on the best, worst, and most interesting cars I reviewed all year long. Again, I hope you all have a fantastic holiday season, whatever you end up doing, and we'll recap next year with some fun, cool videos headed your way. If this is your first time stopping by, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Also check me out on all the social media, same as the YouTube channel name. Until next time, everybody, I hope you stay schwazy, stay healthy, have a wonderful day.